Hi, everyone. My name's Lomit. I'm really excited here today to talk to you about Lean AI, the secret to app growth. And thank you for that wonderful introduction. So launching and growing an app has always been a challenging endeavor. Beyond having a great app and hiring a great team, one of the keys to success really comes down to how well you can leverage your user acquisition efforts. And just by a show of hands, how many people here work in user acquisition? So, like me, there's a lot of things that I love about working in user acquisition. For example, coming to conferences like this, you get to feel like celebrities because you get all the vendors kind of following you around like paparazzis, right? And then, but more importantly, one of the great things about being in user acquisition is that we all have budgets. For the most part, we have budgets anyway. And one of the key, basically the way you manage your budget could be a key factor in terms of how successful you can really grow your app. So one of the things I want to talk to you about today is that user acquisition is continuing to get harder each and every day, as we know. I mean, all of you, like me, I mean, before we're like marketers, we're consumers, and we get bombarded with more and more ads each and every day. From the time you wake up to the time you go to bed on your device, you've probably been inundated with over 100 different ads, and you're probably not going to remember most of those. And so one of the things that I'm going to talk about is kind of my own sort of personal journey. I've worked at IMVU for over 3 years, and in the last 3 years, when I joined the company, we weren't really having a lot of growth, but a lot of our growth has really come in the last 3 years, and it all came on mobile. But it really came down to the way we sort of ended up using our budget to really increase our velocity of learning. And by that, what I mean is that ultimately the secret to growing your app really comes down to how many experiments do you run so that you can really figure out what's working and what's not working. And the faster you can learn what's working, the more you can invest that money into things that are really going to work and less in the things that aren't going to work. So just to tell you quickly about IMVU, so in the last 3 years, we've become the world's largest avatar-based social networking app, and as well as becoming one of the top grossing apps in the App Store. And a lot of that success, as I mentioned, I'm going to talk to you about, really came down to how we ended up getting better, faster, and smarter around executing on our velocity of learning, using AI and machine learning to really enable us to get smarter around scaling growth. So today I'm going to talk to you about 3 ways that we ended up doing that: the old way, the new way, and the smart way of managing your budget. So the old way is primarily, when I joined IMVU about 3 years ago, one of the big challenges walking in was that we were spending money, but we didn't really have a really good idea in terms of how efficiently that money was being spent. And primarily the reason for that was that a lot of our data was living in silos. And so, we didn't really have a good way to connect the dots where we were spending our money and how that money was really performing for us downstream in the app. So one of the first things that my team and I did was to really get smarter around integrating all of our data into one place. Because ultimately, if you want to really, truly take advantage of artificial intelligence, you need to have good data. Because if you have bad data, then you're going to make bad decisions. And so once we integrated all of our data source into one place, then we were ready to sort of pivot over to the new way of managing the budget. And I'm sure a lot of you in this room are probably doing this already, because most of us spend our budget with Google, Facebook, and a whole slew of other partners who've already integrated a lot of decent AI capabilities into their platform. But in order for you to really take advantage of that, it comes down to passing back good data signals to them so that they know what to optimize towards. I, for one, don't have any issues sharing data with with my partners that we work with at IMVU, because ultimately it's helping them to help us to be successful. But one of the things that I did come to realize was just how dependent we were on our partners to really help us to be successful. And I know there's a few sales guys here today, and I've been in user acquisition for over 20 years. I've never had a salesperson ever say to me, "Hey, Lomit, you should spend less money with me today." Have you? And so, ultimately, and I don't blame them, because you know what? Google's not a charity, neither is Facebook, and neither is a whole slew of other companies out there, and neither is IMVU. We all have to do what's best for ourselves. And that's when we started thinking about what's a better and smarter way for us to really manage our budget that really enables us to have a lot more control over how to really influence the outcome of what we're looking for. And without sort of getting into a long-winded story, but one of my inspirations actually came from the finance industry, because if we look at a lot of these day trading companies, I mean, ultimately we're kind of like day traders, because we have a budget and we have specific goals. I mean, for us, it's probably similar to you, where we're optimizing towards a return on ad spend or a cost to acquire a customer, and we have to make decisions pretty much day to day, hour to hour, minute to minute, based on what's working and what's not working. And the more I started studying what they were doing in the finance industry, it kind of inspired me that there has to be a better way than to just rely on your partners telling you how to spend your budget. And that's when we kind of came up with this whole concept called the smart way. And with the smart way, ultimately what we ended up doing was that we created a AI intelligent machine where we already had all of our data integrated in one place. And the big difference was, in the new way, we're really relying on our partners' AI to really tell us how to spend the money. But in the smart way, we have taken a singular view in terms of how all our different partners are performing, and we let our AI intelligent machine make the decisions in terms of how to spend that money based on real-time results on what's working or what's not working with the different partners. And so I can give you kind of a high-level framework in terms of how our AI intelligent machine works. But at the core of it, it's all about enabling us to really increase our velocity of learning by trying to run as many different experiments as possible. And the reality is, that's really what the secret is to growing your app. It's really about just trying to learn quickly and try to automate the process so you can execute better, faster, and smarter than your competitors. And so the framework looks pretty simple if you look at it. It may even look pretty, I don't know. But the key factors are like the inputs, which are things that we know that we can control at the end of the day. And those are things like bids, budgets, goals, and creatives. And then there's a lot of complexity that really goes into like how we automate the process around that, because we're pretty much changing those variables across all the different partners where we spend our money in real time. Because ultimately, everywhere we spend our money are like exchanges, and things are changing day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year. But instead of us trying to figure out making those decisions, we kind of leave it all over to our AI and machine learning algorithms to kind of make those decisions for us. And the key thing that those decisions are focusing towards is really the outcomes that we're looking towards getting to. And for us, ultimately, the outcomes of measuring success comes down to our return on ad spend and our cost to acquire a customer. And then beyond that, the other things that we try to focus on is service and insights, because we always want to continue to grow our audiences so that we can continue to scale our growth. And the other thing that we try to look at is how can we tell a better story to try and get people to take notice of what we're trying to, with our creatives versus all these other ads that people are getting bombarded with. So the creative insights is really important, because that's one thing that we haven't really figured out how to automate yet, but if anybody has here, I'd love to hear about it. And what we try to do, though, is that we take a lot of these insights on creative themes and formats and things that are working and just try to double down. And we have a pretty good in-house creative team that really is just focused completely on churning more and more creative ads for us to feed into our intelligent machine. And so ultimately, the easiest way to look at this is that once everything goes into our intelligent machine, it really gives us the ability. Before, we used to run a couple of hundred experiments a month. Now we're able to run more than a couple of thousand experiments a month. And ultimately, the experiments are really trying to help us to figure out what's the right budget, what's the right bid, what's the right budget, what's the right creative, what's the right audience at any given time to really help us to get to the output, which is to acquire the best lifetime value users for our business. And the other area where AI has really helped us, as you know, when it comes to growth, it isn't just about focusing on acquisition. You also have to focus on retention. But where AI has really helped us on retention is really being able to really identify user behaviors and actions that people are taking within the first 7 days that really are a great predictor to people sticking around on our app. And ultimately, if we can get people to engage more in the product early, then we know they're going to stick around more. And ultimately, it gives us the opportunity to monetize them more as well. And so in terms of the results, when you kind of look at the 3 phases that we went through, the old way, the new way, and the smart way, clearly there wasn't much to really brag about in the old way. But when we went to the new way, we clearly did see some success. But ultimately, we ended up hitting a rate of saturation. And that's when we knew that we had to figure out a better way to be able to manage our budgets. And that's when we ended up, once we moved over to doing it in the smart way, as you can see, we've clearly seen some really amazing results. We've seen a 3x improvement in our return of ad spend, as well as a 3x decline in our cost to acquire a customer. And when this data was taken, it's probably almost a year old. But what I can say to you today is that we have still continued to see that trend improve in both those directions. So we haven't really hit a rate of diminished returns, which is great. And so the results have definitely been great. And one of the problems with having results like this is that it has some side effects too. For example, suddenly your CEO wants to spend a lot of time with you. He suddenly wants to take you to lunch. Suddenly wants to invite you to board meetings, and you know, it's like if you don't want that kind of attention, then sometimes it's just might be better just to stick to the old way, right? So for me, having kind of gone through this, at IMVU and sort of just seeing the shifts in the impact that it's had on the business, I'm a big believer that the future is really about lean AI. And so, the simplest way to think of lean AI, it's really about leveraging data, artificial intelligence, and automation. And instead of trying to sort of build a big team to try and help you execute on all of these experiments, it's really about leaning on technology to try and help you to get better, faster, and smarter around increasing your velocity of learning. So I know at the start of the presentation that quite a few of you work in user acquisition. Are any of you using something like this today? Would you be interested in using something like this? By show of hands? At least I have 2 people. 3. So there is one more thing, though. I was really passionate about this subject, so I actually decided to write a book about it. And I don't know how many of you have heard of the book called The Lean Startup. It was written by Eric Ries, and it was written about 10 years ago. But long story short, Eric Ries is actually a co-founder at IMVU, where I'm working right now. And one of the things that he was really passionate about was sharing back with the industry. In that time, it was really the product industry, about coming up with a whole concept about the minimal viable product. And then he and I were kind of joking about a year ago, because he had seen a lot of the success that we've been having. And, I told him that he should probably, refresh his book, because it's been pretty old. And he kind of turned around and joked with me and said, well, why don't you write it? And I thought, all right, that sounds interesting. I said, but I've never written a book before. And he told me, well, why don't you write a book proposal? And so, like anyone talking to a co-founder, you generally just say, yeah, I can do that, right? So that's what I did. Went home, spoke to Google, and got the answer, right? And so then I ended up, long story short, Eric's been great. He mentored me and encouraged me to write the book. And, my hope is that, as an industry here, we're kind of at this paradigm too, moving into 2020, there's no point trying to do things the way we were doing it in the last decade. So moving into the new decade, I really feel that Lean AI, in some way, shape, or form, is going to end up shaping the way that we're going to move forward as an industry. And I would love for all of you to try and help me, support me in the book by helping to just spread the word about Lean AI and help it go viral, just like it did for Eric Ries. I don't know if it's going to be as popular as his, but you know what? He said you can always hope, right? And so with that, thank you.